I just
Can you guys see?
record to the cloud. Yeah.
Yep. And you guys can see my screen okay with
Yes.
the thing? Okay. So tonight, as far as IGS happenings, we have the jewelry sale that started started today. Members had yesterday to go through before it was open to the public. And then the only other thing that I really have on the calendar is July 14th, we have a show and tell, which I believe the marketing committee is doing. So if you're in town and want to do a quick show and tell on what you're working on, you can do that from 2 to 4 p.m. So I decided that we would this year try and tackle the Writing a Non-Boring Family History by Hazel Edwards. Some of the stuff is not as relevant because she's from Australia, so things are slightly different, and I tried to adjust for that. But so we're going to go over chapter 1, and some of these things we've talked about in previous meetings, but I think it's a good review. So her first thing is kind of prehistory of getting started and things to think about before you actually start writing your book or what your family information. So,
Oh, Stacy, we're seeing the
mountains.
desert Southwest picture.
Oh, you don't.
There you
There it
go.
is.
There
You
you go.
dragged it in. Yep.
See, I thought I clicked to this one. Okay, so let me move this. Let's try that. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks.
And you don't need to see that. Okay. Let's try that again. So, so you guys should have gotten the handout that I sent out earlier, but so what Hazel Edward talks about is that beginning thing of what's your why. So why are you writing your family story and your family history? Is this something you've always wanted to do? All the relatives or locals have died and you become the family, you got everything just kind of by default. You really enjoy researching. You have time available now because you've retired or you're part-time or something like that. There's a significant reunion or anniversary approaching. So you have that 50th wedding anniversary or something like that you're doing it. People keep asking you, when are you going to write your family history? Because I get that I don't know if anybody else does. But it's trying to figure out that, what's your why? Because knowing why you're writing something before you actually start writing it is a good way to help define your scope and figure out what you're going to do. So I'm going to give you a minute here to just kind of, if you think about your next writing project and try and come up with a couple of reasons why you want to write your history. Anybody want to share their reasons why they want to write their history?
Well, mine would be so it's in a format that I can pass on instead of having them just dump my pile of stuff.
Valid. I have that as well.
That's one of my big reasons too. I have another one.
Okay.
I ran across something interesting and I want to pursue it as a theme for a book.
My other part is that I mean, besides the not wanting everything to be lost, as I've started writing, I really like the process of bringing the stories to life and not just having that birth marriage, just not having the dates, because like memorizing the dates for history class was my least favorite thing. It was the stories that I still remember from my freshman year in college, which was a little while ago, those classes. And, it's the stories and the characters that I remember. And so I want to hopefully be able to preserve my family stories in that way so that hopefully other people will be interested in reading them and those individuals will stay alive and not be buried again and not be lost. So there are a lot of reasons why we don't start writing. And I think it's there, we have the excuses, the procrastinations. Some of the things that she suggested is that, family histories, we love that process of gathering the materials, but we don't really want to actually write it up because research and writing are two very different skill sets. So you might be a really good researcher, but starting the writing can be very intimidating. And that can be really frightening when you're doing something that's completely different from what you have been doing for a while. Finding the history could be your lifelong hobby. You've just been doing it forever. Also, it could be that you prefer other aspects of the research process. Maybe you really like their planning and to-do lists or sorting out those old materials, those photos and clippings and documents, tracking down relatives. So there might be some other part of the process that you really, really enjoy. And the writing just keeps getting pushed down and pushed down and pushed down, and you just never get to it. Trying to kind of put yourself in that process and be aware that you're not prolonging gathering materials so that you just don't have to ever reach that stage that is less appealing to you. So ways to deal with procrastination, because most of us have some sort of procrastination or writer's block that'll happen at some point in time. So there's that common, there's so much to do, I don't know where to start. Yeah, I'm just going to make 1 cup of coffee and then, oh, look, that table is dirty. I need to clean that table off. And then, oh, I need to get the garden weeded and I need to get that clothes out of the laundry. And then the day is gone and you never actually came back to doing your book or doing that thing. So having, getting that distracted and doing all these other things. There's the individual that really likes to talk about doing the book, but doesn't really like to actually sit down and do the work to create the book. And sometimes you like being called the family historian, even though you may not have earned that title quite yet by actually producing something in writing. And then it's if I finish the book, what will I do with my spare time? I think that one, I don't really agree with that because in my opinion, it's not going to be 1 book. It's multiple. And then I think this last one is something that a lot of people worry about and fear is that what if my readers don't think it's written well enough? And once I finish that they criticize and, you get some negative feedback. I think it's a harder act and you are putting yourself out there in a vulnerable state when you are actually producing a finished product as well. So there can be some fear around that, especially if you struggle a bit with writing. So now that we've talked about possible procrastination techniques, which there are more out there, you may have some that I didn't hit on. We want to talk about possible solutions for those procrastinations. So I think one of the best things is trying to set aside a regular time or a number of words to be completed in a specific time frame. So you know what, I'm going to do this for a half an hour a day, or I'm going to work on this for an hour a day, or at 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. that's my writing time and that's all I'm going to do. Or I really want to have 500 words today. And give yourself kind of some tasks that you have a specific goal to be able to complete it on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And again, there's some wiggle room in there. So if you're, out of town or whatever, it's not like you have to make that up, but trying to give yourself some regular set aside time for writing is a really great solution for that procrastination. Having a few rituals like, getting your coffee, getting your water, or emptying your trash bin before you get started are good, but you want to only have a couple of rituals. You don't want to get distracted with all those other tasks that can happen when we start looking at our world around us. But once you actually have started, you want to stay until you've reached that time or word goal. Recognize too that work is not always writing. So there's also interviewing and phone calls and thinking about writing and reading and compiling and other tasks involved. So you may have, had this research here, and then all of a sudden you need to figure out, what is the orphan trains, or what is, what were the factors that potentially made them migrate? So you're looking at other things that you're researching that are hopefully going to go into your story and provide that extra context. If you're scared of finishing in case of criticism, invite some experts to read samples or chapters in draft form and ask for their suggestions for the next draft. Your other option is you can also, if you don't have family members or other people that can read it for you, consider using AI as your personal writing editor. So there are, I think Steve Little actually has a genealogy writing chatbot on ChatGPT now. And so you can take it in and it's going to tell you about clarity and other things like that as well. So that would be an option. Again, I would caution you if you're using AI to make sure that the information is all about deceased people and no one living. And then it's talking about kind of your organizational style, because everybody's a little bit different. Are you a hoarder or an occasional collector or a thrower-outer? I don't know a lot of genealogists that are a thrower-outer, but I'm sure there's a couple out there. So, how can you better organize your materials? So it's really hard to start writing if you don't know where your stuff is and you've got things kind of all over the place. So getting yourself organized might be the first part of your plan. And then looking at what is your scope. We've talked about scope a lot in the past over a couple of different meetings, but trying to place limits on your book or your project and what is a manageable scope. I don't think it's realistic to think about doing, 8 generations of both your mother and your father's line in one book, because that's going to be ginormous. Even if you just did descendancies, that's, if you had big families like I do, that, I could just do an ancestry report and I would probably end up with 400 pages. So, thinking about what is a manageable scope of 1 or 2 generations, maybe 3 if you're doing your parents and that sort of thing. But much over 3 is a lot for one book. Before you start, kind of think about what's your organization system for each chapter or section. Are you going to have a folder or binders for each section? Is it in a drawer? Is it a stack of papers? Again, how are you doing that? My organization system is essentially what I have set up. So I have file folders and I have a folder for each person. So I'm pulling that folder as I'm writing. Sherry has gone through a lot of different organization classes, so I would reference you back to those. Diana, did you have a question or no?
Nope.
Or statement? Oh, I just saw the blue light or the little.
That was it. That was a gigglet.
That's okay. Deciding on the chapters by asking questions and using those as the basis for determining what goes, what the content goes. So maybe you're looking at, and you want to do an immigration one, or you want to decide, when did they immigrate and why. And that can also reveal gaps in your research that you might need to fill. So you may have the passenger list in the United States, but you don't have the passenger list where they left from in potentially in Europe or wherever they came from. Or you don't really know what were the political and socioeconomic times of that period and region of why, was it a mass immigration, or were they more silent individual? And if so, do we have any information about that? Choose your software, choose your device that you're going to be writing. Most of us now are probably using some sort of computer software program. I listed the most common ones. But there are still people that want to do things by hand, and I applaud you, and could never do that because I edit too many things and I can't spell, so I need spell checker. So, but if you want to write it out by hand, go for it. I am pretty sure that Barack Obama wrote his first book out by hand on yellow legal paper when I listened to the story, and then he came back and typed it up and edited it and had it edited later. So that works for some people.
Just think about what your process is going to be. I have a friend who wrote it out, 8 generations of ancestry, handwritten narratives for every one of them. And then she had to find a typist because she didn't type.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a good comment as well if you are handwriting and not typing. Nowadays there are so many, I think all of them, Microsoft Word, Google's Docs, and Apple's Pages all have some sort of voice to text feature on them. So even if you're not a great typist,
Right.
that is a feature that's worth exploring on whichever word processing software you prefer.
Gives you a foundation.
It does. I do find that in like names and things I have to correct, but again, it's better than free typing everything if you're a hunt and pecker. And then consider, holding a reunion or a gathering at least a year before your deadline of the written manuscript, so you can display the existing material and request what you need from others. So getting everybody together is a great idea. So the next thing we want to do, again, we've talked about this topic before, is know who are your readers going to be? Know who your audience is. Who are you writing this family history for? For most of us, it's going to be family members, but how the audience, if it's your grandchildren and their ages 6 to 10, your stories are going to be much different than if it's for your adult siblings and cousins that are all your age, or all adults. So you may not be writing it at a 6th grade or 4th grade level. You might be rating at it at a 8th or 10th grade level for that, and you can have other references in there. So knowing who you plan on reading this before you start writing will help the structure and the tone of your writing. And then how will you entice your audience to do more than just flip through the table of contents and find themselves go, hey, I'm here, and then put the book on the shelf. So thinking about how you can draw your family members in, whether that's with, shorter stories, with pictures, there's a lot of different options, and we've talked about some of those in the past as well. And then your challenge is to make the book look and feel attractive. So I listed the increasing potential readership. I'm not gonna go through it in detail, but I'm gonna hit on a couple of things. I think this is a lot of, one, she's talking about having your book professionally published as well, which for most family historians is not gonna happen. It's not a big genre. But for those that are looking at that, that is a possibility. But so the big thing with increasing potential readership, try and use an informative title or appealing cover in a simple layout. So I have taken a outline of my ancestor and uploaded it to ChatGPT and go, can you give me 10 titles based on a family narrative for this person based on these life events? And they've done a pretty good job, better than I can do from a creative perspective. So you can use AI to kind of help generate some possibilities of titles that might be a little bit more interesting than the Joneses family or the Jones and Smith family. So thinking about a way to kind of grab the attention just with the title can be helpful. Mention as many people as possible, or mention it to as many people as possible. So by having that family reunion a year before you plan on having your manuscript done, you've got a whole bunch of people right there that you can then go, hey, look, I've got the book done now. Try and share anecdotes that have a touch of drama to them, and structure the telling of those dramatically. So I think that's a little bit harder for us as genealogists because we're so ingrained in the facts. But you can find, we all have stories that have drama in them. It's just trying to find those. So, your military stories are going to have some aspects of drama in them. If you have any of those black sheep ancestors, you're going to have some drama in there. So I have my mother's Van Berkom family that they like to play on the side of legality a lot. So there's stories about them fleeing the law. That's partly why they, that they fled the law and they weren't coming for, truly political and social reasons. My favorite story of one of those brothers that immigrated, I have the newspaper articles that he was at the courthouse and he was found not guilty for assaulting a man and then was rearrested that same day for assaulting the same man at the courthouse. So again, finding those type of things to add that drama and that touch of whimsy or whatever can help bring those stories to life and make them a little bit more entertaining to read. So that's part of what the setting the stage for the individual against a social, political, religious, or economic context. So bringing them into the larger community. So how did, certain things that they lived through impact them? So thinking about the Depression, thinking about military conflicts, thinking about, if there was a big snow effect. So if there was a great big blizzard that happened in that time frame, finding the newspaper articles or other things that can help give you that context. An index is very helpful, or a descriptive table of contents that informs informative captions on your photos. Locals might be interested in your family history too, especially if you're covering a specific area. So you could potentially then sell it to individuals of theirs or individuals in that community. Include photographs as well as materials and not just words. Make the book a story of individual challenges and reactions to tragedies and success, and not just the birth, marriage, and death dates. Okay. So the next one we're going to talk about is this going to be fun or a drain? And so the fun part of compiling a family history, at least for me, is figuring out the puzzle and putting everything together, locating that missing piece of the story, and finding that new piece that nobody ever knew of. That's really fun for me. I like meeting the interesting people that I meet in different places when I'm going to research and discovering more about my family. But there also can be some draining aspects, and everything takes longer than anticipated. So it is getting easier to get documents and things. But if you're going to ask for something from the National Archives and you have the National Archives send you, it can be a year to a year and a half before you get those records. I have sent in the FOIA request through the Reclaim the Records for military records from the VA. And I sent those in February, and I got a whole bunch of letters saying we haven't, we recognize that we got your FOIA request and I will get you the records when we have time. And I haven't seen anything yet. So, and so some of those things, if it, personally, I tend to hire a genealogy researcher to go to the National Archives because they're actually usually cheaper and faster. But it's still, there's an expense that goes along with that. Everything costs more than expected. So, having those fees for different things. Some of your relatives expect to be mentioned more favorably than what you are tend to write it about. So, and more favorably than they can be. Because again, not everybody's is sunshine and roses. So we have the family members that are the cranky, not so nice individuals as well. And then it's how do you make all of that mundane in that daily life more dramatic and interesting? Trying to figure that out. And then sometimes it's what you include and what you leave out might offend somebody. So you have that negative feedback again. If anything is left out, someone will complain because you didn't add this and you didn't talk about that and you didn't do this. So those are kind of those drains on you. The only solutions is to leave the editorial responsibility to the person that's doing all the work. It's your story. You get to write it the way you want to write it. It's your name is on the book. So before you start writing, it's also really good to have that deadline figured out. So coming up with a deadline before you start is a good idea, because otherwise it can go on and on and on and not be finished. The first time writer, you always want to you probably want to leave at least a year to get your book done. So if you think if you have that special event, I would start doing it at least a year beforehand. And that's assuming that you've already done the genealogy. So if you're just starting and haven't done any genealogy whatsoever, it might take you more than a year to gather everything and write up the stories. So spend some time calculating dates by which you will need to have different steps completed that will lead to the publication of your family history. So first of all, trying to come up with a deadline. Is this something for Christmas? It's already June. So if we haven't started writing, that's a lot of work to hit before June or before Christmas, because really you're going to have it to the printers probably at the latest at the end of November. Allow some extra months flexibility as an insurance. Figure out what you need to have for dates to the printer. So I've used Lulu to publish things for me, and I tend to I've had no problem with waiting for their Black Friday sales at Thanksgiving time and sending it out at Black Friday. I've always had it back before Christmas if I'm doing Christmas on Christmas. So that is my experience. I have not used Blurb, which is another online self-publishing company, but you could also just print it out on your home computer if you're just doing a couple copies, or take it to Staples or UPS and print it out at one of those stores as well. Think about the date that you want to have your final copy or manuscript that would be completely edited and not just self-edited, and who's going to be your editors. Again, family, friends, AI. Date by which you need the photographs and illustrations, and who's going to supply them. Do you have all of those already? Or are you going to be needing to talk to family and friends to get them? Date to complete self-editing, dates by which your draft of your manuscripts will be done. You might have your first draft and your second draft and your third draft and your final draft, and however many in between there. And then think about the date with which your majority of your research will be completed, because I say that the genealogy research has been completed. You've got enough information that you can write the stories of the birth, marriage, and death and the life events, but you may be researching the social history. So other things that you want to think about too is, putting down a working title. Do you have an idea about a word length or page number, pages that you want? Is there a page limit that you're looking at? Is it a 200? Is it a 250? Is it a 100? What are you looking at? How many chapters and what are their titles? How are you going to collect material? How are you going to conduct interviews? All of those type of things. The next topic she talks about is having co-writers or collaborators. And I have not really had a collaborator at all for family history. I did write my master thesis with 2 other people, so I do have some experience in collaborating while writing. But so having a good collaborator at the start of a history project can be a great asset. So especially if however, if you have someone that is inefficient, slow, or really far away from you, it can be a liability. So if you are going to collaborate with somebody else, you want to think that through very carefully. Working with someone whose ethical or professional views differ radically from your own can also present a lot of challenges. So if you come in from a perspective that you want a source for every single fact, and the person that you're going to collaborate with goes, I don't think we need to put any sources in at all, that might be a problem for you guys in collaboration. So thinking about just kind of those type of topics or traits. Sometimes you also inherit other family history collaborators. So other times you have a choice. So if it's your decision, you may want to consider the following things. What are your collaborators' likely strengths and weaknesses? And what are yours? So it's not only thinking about the person you're collaborating with, but what are your strengths and weaknesses? And if you guys complement each other, that's great. So when I was working on my master thesis, my other two collaborators, which we were kind of put together, we didn't have a choice in that part of it, but we all kind of picked different, we all had different strengths and we picked out different things that we would work on. So we wrote together, we took it home each night and edited it, and we edited different things. We looked for different things of different strengths that we had. So that worked out really well. Thinking about personality wise, do you guys get along? So if you don't get along with the person, you probably don't want to do a project with the person, right? And do your, personalities work well together? Does this person work at the same speed and level that you do? Are you guys speaking the same language? Or, are you a intermediate to advanced genealogist and the person that you're working with is a baby genealogist? That might be a challenge as well. Is it possible to split the work into separate sections and be responsible for certain areas? So thinking about that. And then will their contribution be occasional as a compiler or an editor, that they can change, certain chapters might be to each family member. So a great way to collaborate would be to go, all right, you're going to get mom's family and you're going to do your family, and each person kind of writes their own stories. The problem there is that you're going to have a lot of different writing styles. So trying to make it feel more cohesive can be a problem with that. But it can be done more quickly. So if people are willing to do that. There's a lot of benefits of collaborating. So you can share equally, but you might have different skill sets. You might learn a new perspective or from another field or learn some new skills. You can quickly learn new techniques from a practitioner. So working online with a genealogical researcher is faster than going through a course. You might have some accountability. So if you have a hard time with deadlines, but you're really good with, hey, we're going to meet every Wednesday and you need to have this stuff done, that might give you that accountability to finish before the next meeting. It might enable you to work in different locations or alternate workspaces so that you have a little bit more just environmental stimuli. You can have the stimulation of working with a mind that thinks differently, so you can discuss and kind of talk through your logic. You can ensure, improve strategic use of time, especially as that deadline gets close. And it counters that isolation of researching alone when you're in your own little bubble. And you can have that comparison basis for comparisons. So we've talked about the good parts of collaborating. Now let's talk about the things that don't always work right. So sometimes the collaborations are not all that successful. And part of the reasons could be that when you first started talking about it, you were kind of ambiguous, or you didn't have good structure on what your project was. And so someone misinterpreted what the final outcome was going to like. You have someone that's unreliable in starting and finishing. There's unequal collaboration. So every time we, when we were in elementary or, high school or college and we had group projects, these are all of the things of why people don't like group projects. Because you ultimately, you have one person that does all the work, you have one person that takes all the credit, they never show up, they don't have their work done. I mean, so it's all of those kinds of things. So again, whether to collaborate or not is up to you, but think about it before you go into a collaboration. And I'm not going to talk about all of that. So the next thing is to think about is cost. So what is the cost and who's going to pay for it are things to consider. So when you're doing all your researching, so there might be traveling involved, there might be costs for computer scanning, getting documents. Is that something that you're just taking on as part of your genealogy, or is this something that you're going to try and have other people help you pay for? And if so, what is that going to look like? And then there's also the printing and publishing and distribution of the book as well. What does that look like? And then if you can clarify in writing as much as possible the procedures for original material and how will that be handled? Who's going to return it? Are you going to need to get permission before something is used in the book? So I added the copyright terms of use for the United States. So right now it is the year of 1929. Anything in 1929 or earlier is out of copyright. So you are free to use that, whether it is a letter, a photo, it doesn't matter. It is no longer in copyright. If you have anything that is after 1929 or 1930 and more recent, then that copyright still holds, even if the individual is deceased. You may need to get, so then it would be their descendants, so especially if you're writing letters, and it would be whoever wrote the letter, not the recipient. So if you have love letters that your grandfather sent your grandmother, hopefully, that the family is still intact. But if it was an ex-grandfather, you might have more difficulty because it's going to be to the descendants of the individual that wrote it. Same with photos. So the copyright goes with the photographer. So if you have things from a photo studio and things like that, you want to consider those components. I also included an article of Judy Russell about, and that was more on online photos, things that are online, and you can search Judy's blog for for more information about copyright and licensing as well. So the other thing that we always need to talk about is the controversial bits. So for most researchers, there's going to be some part of their family they're going to be finding a family secret that no one else knew about. And then they need to decide whether or not that information should be included or excluded. And I really think that each writer needs to determine for themselves what to include and what to exclude. So these are just kind of some of those questions of what would you do if. So issues which today would not be considered shameful nor need to be kept secret were revealed by a researcher, and some older family members really wish to exclude those facts. Would you exclude them, or would you put them in? An adoption has been kept secret and the adult adoptee still doesn't know. Would you include that information in the history or not? An illegitimate child was discovered. How would you list the child in the family tree? Do you list the child in the family tree? And how do you do that? A child was brought up by their grandmother as if she were the mother, and the child's biological mother acted as her older sister. I actually think this was Jack Nicholson story as well. I think that his grandmother brought him up as his mother, and his sister was actually his biological mother. So what do you, how do you deal with that? And how do you write it in the family tree? Because most likely there wasn't a true adoption that happened like with that, right? The grandmother just probably took over guardianship of them. According to the will, the adult children were to inherit equally, but one took over everything and the others still don't know the details of the will. Dates do not correspond, so their children were born out of wedlock. A suicide had been hushed up as a disgrace and the body buried outside the church walls or written up as an accidental death. A genetic weakness existed in a well-known family, but this has been covered up until now. So those are just examples of some potential difficult subjects that might come up. And then it's the how are you going to deal with that? Her guideline is if a fact is on public record and listed in an easily accessible record, then you're probably okay to talk about it. Illegitimacy is often just there, and some historians will include it as a baseborn or natural child's birth by simply inserting a and between the natural parents where there is no marriage date. In earlier times, many marriages were after the birth of the first child. You want to make sure that you do not falsify the record, so don't change dates to make them correspond to having a child born in wedlock. For me, I also looked to social history to explain was illegitimacy normal for that time and place. And so Nicole Dyer had a really good family narrative about one of her ancestors' lines that there was like 4 generations of illegitimacy. And it was mostly in England before they came to the US. And really what she ended up finding was that during that time frame in England for the poor, it was not uncommon for them not to be married. And so there was, it was a social norm type of a deal that the poor, the very, very destitute of that time frame just didn't get married. Did they live in a remote location and it would have been a challenge to get to a courthouse or to get a marriage license or have a religious ceremony? So there are things that you can kind of look at to potentially add reasons of why they may have not been married or had that out of wedlock child. If there are several versions of what happened, include those stories in the style of your writing. So you can say something like family lore gives 3 possible reasons why this person immigrated, and you can list those reasons. And then consider using the genealogical proof standard with the analysis and compare. So, if we've looked at our documents, I have a document that I have 5 sources for my grandmother's birth date. And of them, 4 of them list Powers Lake, North Dakota, and only 1 of them lists Colleyville, North Dakota. So if I just went by the numbers, it would make more sense that Powers Lake was where she was born. But the one that lists Colleyville was her birth certificate, which was created 3 days after she was born. And Colleyville is a township that is not, it's a land description. It was never incorporated into a town. There was never any public works for it. And so the family all just said that she was born in Powers Lake, even though she was technically born at home in the township of Colleyville. So that part of the GPS that this is talking about, the genealogical proof standard, is the analysis and comparison, the conflict resolution, and the written statement. So look at all the facts that you've gathered, analyze them, resolve any conflict, and provide the most plausible, correct answer in the written statement. And you have this down. This is actually from my 4-generation report with resolving conflicting information. So this is written in a narrative, more formal writing, not necessarily family history, but essentially I just went through, I described what I said there. And then I added in I have the Burke County history book. And they also in 1910, they just changed the tax list to be part of Powers Lake. So that probably also contributed to why she was listed as being born in Powers Lake versus Colleyville Township. So acknowledging the difficulties that a researcher might have had in a particular aspect of a subject's life is a valid way to include touchy material and give the reason why it's difficult. So, using those wiggle worms of assuming, probable, possibly, despite, all of those kind of wiggle worms can help you, wiggle words can help you acknowledge some of those difficult things and touchy subjects. And And then, I mean, like I've used in the before example, my cousin's family that I researched their dad's side of the family that they knew very little about. I actually did a disclaimer at the beginning because there was a lot of tough content in there. There were 4 generations of single mothers through divorce, through a murder, through a mining accident, and there were a couple of divorces. And so there was a lot of trauma. And so writing about some of those things can be challenging, and trying to, give you can, depending on the type of narrative that you're doing, you can put yourself in there and discuss how it was difficult to write this. If you can't support it with evidence, I really do recommend leaving it out. I do put sources personally. I do put sources in all of my books that I do. So that, because at one point in time, I don't remember if it was Tom Jones or if it was somebody else. I might not be crediting it correctly. But essentially, one of them said that a family history without sources is fiction, because you have no way to prove any of it. There's no evidence to support any of it. So personally, I do put citations in. Some of them are footnotes, some of them are endnotes, depending on the type of book that I'm doing, but I do citations. And then it's hard to take out our own personal feelings and our own biases, but try not to use your family history as a vehicle of revenge, and kind of edit yourself out of that if possible. Looking at publishing, we kind of talked a little bit about that earlier. Commercial publishing, you're going to be sending a book proposal and a sample chapter to a publisher. Again, this is rare for most family history books, unless you're doing something like Roots or Ashla's Ashes, or that type of a book that might be a fictionalized component of history. Self-publishing, like I said, I've used Lulu, but there's also Blurb or Amazon. You're the publisher. You write, edit the book with or without professional help for editing. And then you're gonna upload your book and pick out what you want, your different features. I have found Lulu pretty reasonable. I've done 240, around 200-ish page books. And they have been under 25, 30 bucks a piece. And that's a hardbound color copy on a medium weight paper. So I've found that to be fairly reasonable. I'm also only doing a handful. I'm not doing a ton of, I'm doing maybe, 4 or 5 books at a time. So I'm not doing a large run. Editing, consider having a trusted individual edit for you. So if you have a teacher in your family, a lawyer, or, an English major is really great if you have somebody that was an English teacher. But trying to, get somebody that hopefully can do some editing for you. But again, AI is a good editor as long as you don't have anything about living individuals in there. We talked about scope already, but we just kind of hit it back again. Defining your scope from the beginning of your project helps you really kind of keep it tight and helps you focus on what you want to write. So, is it going to be a specific time frame? Is it a family group? If you are, how many generations? Are you going to include in-laws? Are you going to include in-laws' families? Where are you stopping? What are you including and what are you excluding? So thinking about that in specific. What is the format that you're going to have? Is this a book? Is it more of a photograph, scrapbook type of thing with telling the story of each photo? Is it just you're copying letters and retyping them? Is it a recipe book? Is it an ebook? Is it a blog? How are you going to distribute this? So having that in mind before you start is a great idea. I loved her research-itis because I feel like we all have research-itis. So her definition of research-itis is a disease contracted by enthusiastic collectors who have done so much work that they are determined to put everything in the final version. Often they lose the ability to discriminate between what is relevant and what took an excess amount of time or effort to find, and therefore that makes it important. So I certainly, I can relate to that of trying to cut things out at times. So thinking about how much is enough. Set yourself a time limit if there is no external one. Decide what portions of the book will be spent on a specific subject or person. Keep the agreed about pages of the book and cut texts accordingly. So this part I actually added in different than hers because she was combining her sources and her information, and I couldn't in good conscience do that after I've taught the GPS class. So so thinking about your sources, and when we're looking at sources, thinking about what information they have. So this is a very, very, very short overview about different sources. So your sources are your containers. So I like to think about them as container ships on a railroad track. So all of your containers are, each box is a container. So in those, you have all of your different types of sources. So you have original records. So that's anything that is unedited or modified. It can be a facsimile, so you can have a photocopy of it, and often that's still considered original as long as it hasn't been changed. So this is going to be your birth, marriage, death certificates, your census records, your passenger list, probate records, land records, deed records, all of those original actual records that say everything on there. A derivative, and those are your most reliable sources, typically are your original records. A derivative is something that has been transcribed, extracted, or translated. So these are going to be all of your indexes. So if you have an index of a birth record, there might have been a transcription error. So you're going to want to try and get the actual birth certificate or birth register if that is available to you based on the open access laws of that location. You might have a deed abstract book. So again, it's abstracting and taking out parts and pieces of that. So these are all those indexes and things like that. Authored works are your case studies, your family histories, your military histories, all of those compiled things that was written by somebody. Generally, original records are the most accurate in the records that we want to get. However, we have all seen birth certificates that are incorrect and death certificates that are incorrect and census records that are incorrect. So you do need to take all of the records together and analyze them collectively to see what is the same, what is different, and then try and resolve that conflict. So then each source has information, and they can have different types of information on the same record. So primary information is your firsthand eyewitness account. This is usually the most reliable. Your secondary information is hearsay or a secondary account. And then finally, you have unknown, where the informant is not listed. So if you think about a birth date, so for a birth date, you would need to have someone for it to be primary information, someone that was actually physically there at your birth. So your mother, your father, maybe a grandparent or a sibling. That birth date for you is always going to be secondary information, because you may have been at your birth, but you're certainly not going to remember your birth, right? So you only know your birth date because someone told you what your birth date was. That's secondary information. And there are documents. So a death certificate is a great example that has both primary information, which is going to be about the death. So typically someone that was at the death, the physician is filling that out about the components of the death. But the rest of the information about where they were born, who, their birth date, location, their parents, all of that information might be secondary information, or we might not even know because we can't figure out who the informant is. So you got to look at each piece of information, each source. And then you have your evidence, which is direct and explicitly answers your research questions. So, you know, when and where was this person born? And you have a birth certificate that answers that. So that would be direct. Indirect, it suggests or implies the answer to the research question. So, like on a census record, you've got, they had, that, a marriage, you might have, they were married for 33 years, you have to calculate, and it doesn't give you the specific answer to it. It implies that they were married in, 1877 or something like that, because you're calculating it out. Or you have, the other component is that you have records stating this person's father is George, but you have nothing listed for this person over here, Anne, but you have that Anne is George's sister. So then you can, and deduce that George was also Anne's father, that type of thing. And then negative evidence is evidence that you would expect to find, but it's not there. So no information was found when you expect to find something. So if you have census records for, 3 censuses in a row, and all of a sudden they don't show up on the 4th census, you would then suggest that they either moved or they died. And so you would have expected to found them. So that would be your negative evidence. Because sometimes back in the early 1800s, we didn't actually have death certificates. So that might be your only clue that someone might have passed, or a new wife shows up, type of thing between censuses. So you will most likely use a combination of your source information and evidence while you're writing. You maybe used authored works to fill in social and historical information from that period of time, to provide context to your readers. Like I said, be sure to cite your authored works that you use, and be aware of copyright restrictions. Look for images that are in the public domain, that are available under the Creative Commons license, that are easily, that you can use, just by giving credit. Any questions or comments about all of that?
One thing I was thinking of when you were talking about the parts that we like best. We like doing some things better than others. My favorite part is the analysis and correlations. So I find that if I take that question, any question, but some question on that person, and turn it into a proof argument, that gives me the basis for my chapter about that person.
Yeah.
It makes my mind work harder on it. It makes me think about all the aspects of it, and it's also more fun.
I think that's part of the, like I've talked about before, but before I started writing and before I kind of took my genealogy to the next level, I was really a collector of records. So I had, I got the birth certificate check, I got the death certificate check, I got the census records check. But I looked at them for clues, but I didn't really take the time to look at them all together and go and analyze them and look for the conflict, or make sure that they didn't conflict, and then try and figure out why did they conflict. And that, I think, is a part of that has improved my skills as a genealogist with the writing process, because I'm now taking everything that I've got and analyzing all of it and going, oh wait, these things don't match. Or, who knew? My second great grandparents weren't married for 2 years until after their first child was born. And that's why I have all these different dates of when they were married that don't line up at all, until I got the marriage certificate.
Mm-hmm. Why was she married 4 times and only divorced twice?
Yeah. Well, and divorce records are hard because a lot of those are still at the county courthouse. So if you don't know where they got divorced, that might be a challenge.
No, she wasn't divorced.
All right, then.
First one died, the third one, it was an invalid marriage. He still had a wife.
All right, then. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that I agree. I think the analysis is a vital part that,
It's the fun part.
yeah, that sometimes isn't done until you start writing things.
Question.
All right.
On the
Anybody else have
copyright.
any questions or comments? Hey, Lisa.
I had a question. It's kind of on the copyright type thing. My grandmother, before she passed, gave me all of her journals. And of course, she was born in 16, so not too many of them fall before 29. Now, like I said, she did give them to me. Quoting out of them, where does that fall? Am I the owner because she gave them to me?
So I don't know. That would be a great question to pose for Judy on Judy's blog. So she has a Ask Judy section. And so, I mean, that could have been that, you know, that she essentially willed them to you and that you have the copyright. But I'm not a, you know, I mean, the other part too is that if you have, you know, if there are any of her children left that are alive, then, I mean, so then it would be, if they're not alive to ask for permission, it would be your generation to ask for permission of taking excerpts out of it. And I would just always put it in quotes and definitely source it. But then it's also when we have to think about copyright, it's the who's going to sue for copyright, right? What's the risk of you being sued for copyright and who's going to take that? Yeah. So, you know, for something like that, I probably, you know, I think you're going to be okay. But it's more of the, you know, if you're using stuff of social history, if you're using, you know, especially if you're using larger excerpts out of things, being aware of what that is and fair use doctrine and that sort of thing.
Just
Yeah,
a
it's
problem
more
if you have a
being able to
litigious
back up.
cousin.
Yeah, it's more of a choice to back up people that we don't have documentation on when they were born or when someone died. You know,
Mhm.
because it's little short excerpts from the farm.
Yep.
And you know, so there's a lot of, well, we had this many chickens. You know, it's a
And
farm wise journal.
I mean, the other part too that isn't, facts aren't copyrightable. So if you just have a grandma wrote in her diary, John Smith was born on this day, that's not really, I mean, that's not a copyright being, facts aren't, you know, I don't have to worry about putting down anything that I use about the Homestead Act because again, it's a fact. It's not copyrightable. I can't copyright a fact. It has to be something that is imaginative or, you know, creative or, you know, something like that. It's a creative component. That's part of and it has to be a human. So that's where the AI can't be copyright, can't hold a copyright because it's not a human. Just like, I don't know if you ever heard anything about the elephant that drew pictures at the zoo. They can't copyright the elephant's picture because it's not a human, or the monkey photo. Because again, those aren't copyrightable because it has to be a human. So if it's just, you know, if it's just, again, same like a family Bible, if it's just names and dates in a family Bible, I think you can use that to support your facts, but I don't think that is copyrightable. If you're taking something out of the Bible, then the Bible version is going to be copyrightable. But again, if you have a version that's before 1929, then you're okay as well. At least that's my understanding as a healthcare professional and not a lawyer.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
Great reminders of some of the basics that we have to consider.
Okay, so for next month, for July, I don't have a topic in mind at the moment. I have had a topic so one of the things that I've thought about is giving some tips and techniques on finding photographs that are in the public domain. Is that something of interest to individuals?
It's always helpful.
Okay. So I will probably work on that for next month of public domain images for us of where to find them and how to know what's in the public domain and what's not. So I've got a spreadsheet of collections, so I will probably give you that and then kind of do a little bit more on that. So that will be our topic then for next month is public domain images, where to find them and how to get them. All
Thank you.
right, you're welcome. All right, well, if there's nothing further, I'm gonna stop the recording.